I'm Maggie. I'm from Thiel College from the Neuroscience class. You guys sent us questions and we're going to be answering them. So the question that I'm answering is, what part of the brain makes you sleepwalk? There are no single part of the brain that causes you to sleepwalk. When we sleep, our brain slips into several stages. The stages consist of non-eye rapid movement phase, which is also known as NREM sleep, and the rapid eye movement phase, which is known as REM sleep. Each phase lasts for about an hour and a half. Sleepwalking occurs at the end of the NREM phase because your body is in a semi-awakened state. During the NREM phase, the brain waves are functioning at their highest level. This allows the sleeper to be in a deep sleep, yet still can be physically active. This is where scientists believe is when sleepwalking occurs. This is still a mystery why some people transition from high brain waves to sleepwalking instead of continuing to sleep. The second question I'm answering is, what part of the brain tells you that you are hungry? In the middle of the brain, there is a circuit in the hypothalamus, which is important to appetite control. When there is no food in the stomach, a hormone, which is also known as ghrelin, is released in the bloodstream. The process stimulates appetite or the feeling of hunger. Ghrelin, which is the hormone, suddenly decreases after a meal is eaten. The process starts with visual and touch information that travels up to the spine to the hypothalamus. In the hypothalamus, the hormone ghrelin activates an NPY neuron, which then sends a signal to stimulate the sensation of hunger.
Are men's brains bigger than women's? The human brain, on average, is around 15 centimeters long and weighs about 3 pounds. 15 centimeters is about the size of 2 pencils, and 3 pounds is the equivalent of holding 3 baseballs in your hand at once. The question we were asked is if men had bigger brains than women. Actually, some scientists have discovered that on average, men's brains are just a teeny bit larger. Men's brains are still 3 pounds, but women's are around 2.75 pounds. There's only a tiny difference between the two brains, only about a 10% difference. The difference between brain sizes does not mean that men are more intelligent than women. Some women's brains can be larger than 3 pounds, while some men's brains can weigh less. So really, there is not a difference between men and women's brains. How long is the spinal cord and how much does it weigh? The spinal cord is what connects your brain to the rest of your body. Nerves branch out from the spinal cord to every other part on your body. The spinal cord is surrounded by the bones in your spinal column, which protects it against any outside forces. The average person's spinal cord is longer in men than in women because of height differences. By only about an inch, men's average spinal cords are 17 inches, while women's are about 16 inches. 17 inches is a little more than 2 pencils put end to end. The spinal cord is about as thick as your thumb and weighs less than a pound. It weighs about as much as 2 coins in your hand. The spinal cord is very important to your body, regardless of how little it weighs.
What part of the brain controls our emotions? The limbic system is what primarily controls our emotions. The important structures within the limbic system are the amygdala, hippocampus, thalamus, hypothalamus, basal ganglia, and cingulate gyrus. The most important structure in the limbic system for controlling emotions is the amygdala, which is known as the emotional center in the brain. The amygdala is involved in evaluating situations and determining if you are happy, sad, or scared, for example. This part of the brain is also responsible for our body responding to fear in 2 ways, either fight or flight. This means that our body automatically prepares us to fight whatever is threatening us or to run, which is known as flight. Our amygdala is the most important structure in controlling and regulating our emotions. How are memories stored and retrieved? Our brain receives and interprets many different types of information every day. Specific brain regions are responsible for allowing us to receive and store this information properly, so we can remember both long and short-term memories. The hippocampal formation plays a very key role in forming memories. The hippocampal formation receives information from other brain regions and then processes it. The memories are then altered in a way that allows us to remember the different pieces of the memory. If the hippocampal formation did not consolidate memories in this way, we would just have singular memories that are not linked together, making it impossible for us to store them.
How big is a baby's brain? An average newborn human baby's brain weighs about 350 to 400 grams, or 3/4 of a pound. The average adult brain weighs from 1,300 to 1,400 grams, which is about 3 pounds. Even though an adult brain weighs different than a baby's brain, it still has almost the same amount of neurons. Who has the smallest brain? The fruit fly is the organism with the smallest brain. It has about 250,000 neurons. That might seem a lot, but if you compare it to a human brain that has approximately over 100 billion neurons, then you would know that the fruit fly brain is super small. Even though it has a small brain, it still has somewhat of a conscience, and it has the ability to learn. So this shows that even though the fruit fly has a small brain, it's still able to do certain things. On a side note, jellyfish doesn't have a brain at all.
Does our brain help us breathe, and if so, how? The answer is yes. Our brain does help us breathe. At the base of our brain, we have what is called a brainstem. The brainstem consists of 3 main parts, and one of those parts, the medulla, is the part that is responsible for controlling cardiac and respiratory rates. The medulla sends signals down your spine to the muscles that help and allow us to breathe. These signals happen all at the same time, so you don't have to focus or try to breathe. It just happens naturally without us even thinking about it. But even though it happens automatically, we can control our breathing as far as breathing faster or holding our breath. Another way our brain helps us breathe is by our emotions or feelings. You know that if you have ever been angry, mad, or even scared, your breathing changes, usually by getting faster with deeper breaths. Physical activities also influences our breathing. If you are being physically active, like running, biking, swimming, you need to breathe more often than if you were going throughout your normal daily activity. So to sum up, our brains are very important in all things that our bodies do, and especially breathing. Does the brain control whether a person is in love or not? The answer is yes. Your brain plays a major role in whether you are in love with someone or not. You use parts of the brain that help you read somebody's body language, as well as your own. But it is not just the brain itself that contributes to this feeling of love. Chemicals in the brain help us to be able to feel attraction to someone. The feeling of butterflies in your stomach when you become attracted to someone is due to an increase of a chemical in the brain called dopamine, which is the chemical that makes us feel good and produces a feeling of bliss or happiness. These chemical changes can happen very quickly depending on how strong the attraction to the other person is. The longer the attraction between two people lasts, less dopamine is released and other chemicals begin to be released, which are meant to solidify those feelings you have for each other and ultimately be in love. There are also advantages to falling in love. According to one study, being in love can actually increase a person's ability to problem solve and motor skills. So yes, your brain does play a major role in whether a person is in love or not, and can be very good for the brain.
The brain keeps a memory best, the left or the right? And to answer that question, I have to show you an image of the brain, which is going to show that neither side keeps memory better than the other. They both do pretty much an equal amount. So entirely your whole brain keeps your memory. There's not really a dominant side. It all works together as a team to keep the entire picture. So not one side, all of it does it. How does the brain of a person with a higher IQ differ from the person with a lower IQ? And the answer to that is it really doesn't differ much in appearance. Everybody's brain's typically about the same size depending on how old you are. But somebody with a diseased brain, maybe like an attention deficit disorder or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, things like that, they could have a different sized brain. But typically your brain and your IQ is made up of certain percentages of things given to you from your parents and what you learn from your daily activities. So your brain itself looks the same. It's basically what your parents give you, making up part of your IQ and your life experiences. So generally your physical appearance, they all look the same.
In the past few years, it has come to light that the game of soccer can result in brain injury. Brain injury in this game is generally a result of repeated concussive brain trauma. Chronic concussive brain trauma happens when certain proteins are damaged after a person gets their head injured many times. Soccer players who have shown symptoms for and been diagnosed with brain injury from playing the game have relied heavily on heading in their soccer careers. Heading is when the player hits the soccer ball with their heads. Like, they throw the soccer ball up and then jump and hit it with their heads to block. Heading gives the player the opportunity to change the direction of the ball while it's still high in the air where their feet can't reach it. That tactic is most used by the center back player who defends at the 18-yard box, which is kind of center field. The center back player, it mostly focuses on cutting off advances from the opposition. The science of the brain is generally called neuroscience. Humans have been trying to study the brain since the very beginning of time. Even prehistoric people they've found skulls where people have tried to conduct brain injury from before documented history even began. However, neuroscience itself is a relatively new term. Cognitive science became popular around the 1950s, and that's kind of a blanket term to cover all of the different studies that have worked towards compiling the knowledge of the brain and the mind that we have now. Cognitive science includes psychology, philosophy, language, anthropology, and artificial intelligence research. All of these fields have focused their studies on the brain. Although the cognitive sciences were popular around the 1950s, the ideas that scientists studied the mind, the ideas that the scientists had studied the mind built off of roots all the way back to Greek and Roman times. So to answer the question, the science of the brain is today called neuroscience, but scientific information about the brain can be found in many other disciplines too.
What is the largest part of the brain? The largest part of the brain is the cerebrum, which has two hemispheres. It has the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. What part of the brain helps you sleep? The part of the brain that helps you sleep is the hippocampus. Inside the hippocampus, there's this neurotransmitter named histamine. The neurotransmitter histamine keeps you awake. So, when you're sleeping, your body releases something that blocks histamine, so antihistamine. Basically, it's an antagonist, so it blocks the receptors that histamine binds to. So, once that's blocked, there's no histamine there, so you start to fall asleep. But you don't really fall asleep. It's basically a transaction into going to sleep. Basically from there, it goes to a different system, which is the ventricle lateral preoptic nucleus, or the VLPO for short. Basically, that part of the brain is arousal. And basically, in that area, you will send, when you're sleepy, you send inhibitors, which will cause you to sleep.